Alright guys, I love Milos Forman, I love Man on the Moon. I heard this documentary was coming out on Netflix, I was really pumped to watch it, so I watched it. I didn't plan on doing a video about it, but I really want to talk about this one, so let's talk about it. Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. So Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond is a documentary. I guess Jim Carrey had a camera crew following him around, documenting everything behind the scenes of the making of the movie Man on the Moon. For those of you who don't know what Man on the Moon is the Milos Forman directed biopic about Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was a comedian. He was also ultimately a super troll. He was like an internet troll pre-internet. He was a troll before we knew what a troll was. He was just a guy who liked fucking with people. Some saw him as a comic genius, some saw him as annoying. Point is, he left his mark. Jim Carrey really wanted to play the role. Jim Carrey played the role, and now we see how Jim Carrey got into the mind of the role. See, I had heard stories, I had heard tale back in the day from the DVD commentary on Man on the Moon that Jim Carrey never showed up for work. It was either Andy Kaufman, Foreign Man, who was also Latka, and Tony Clifton. I loved Tony Clifton when this movie came out, man. I used to go through drive-thrus and order a bunch of food that wasn't on the menu. Go to Taco Bell, I'm like, hey, don't like a Big Mac, a large order, fries, and a Whopper. Stupid thing is, I would eat the food I actually ordered for real. So 98% I've tasted semen in my life and didn't know it. But back to the movie, you really did see how meta Jim Carrey got. And what makes it great is it's a 20-year retrospective. There are also interviews with Jim Carrey now talking about his thought process then, what he thinks when he watches this footage. Yeah, this footage was never supposed to come out. The studio was like, we don't want people thinking Jim Carrey is an asshole, so no to the release of this footage. Now, apparently they just don't care. Or in a social media world, it does have a market and a place. And as sometimes that meta shit can really look annoying as hell, like Jared Leto did with the Joker, mailing people dead rats and condoms and shit. What it looks like Jim Carrey did, I don't know if he did it on purpose or accidentally, but he created a weird fantasy pocket. He created a bubble where his fantasy world was just taking hold and infecting other people. I find that really fascinating. At one point in here, it shows Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman having a father-son argument with the guy who plays Andy Kaufman's dad in the movie. They were arguing like Andy Kaufman's dad and Andy Kaufman, like, oh, like, get a job kind of thing. It looked like such a legit father-son argument. And at one point, it looked like Jim Carrey sat down with Andy Kaufman's daughter and had a father-daughter conversation with her. That stuff is wild, man. It really is a documentary about human connection. And if for nothing else, the phenomenon that if you introduce a life form into an environment, the life form will have to adapt to its environment. But Jim Carrey on Man on the Moon created an environment that just kind of conformed to him, like some sort of gravitational pull. Maybe this would have been really annoying to see like 20 years ago. You're like, dude, why is that guy being a dick behind scenes? Cameras are off, man. Just snap out of it. Be a human being. That's what makes it really interesting to me, is seeing Jim Carrey now talking about how ultimately everything in your life that happens touches you and changes you in some way, shape, or form. You're not the same 20 years later you would have been had you not had that experience. And he talks about how Man on the Moon has, yeah, it changed him. It changed his life. It touched his life. His life is altered because he took on that role. Granted, his life is altered because he took on the Grinch, I imagine. But this seems to be a really big fork in the road of Jim Carrey's life. My critique for Jim Carrey, I don't know why, I don't know who I am to be like, well, Jim Carrey, take it from someone who's made it in life. But my critique I would have is when Jim Carrey is interacting with Jerry Lawler on set, and cameras aren't rolling, he's a dick to him. On set, Jim Carrey was being the Andy Kaufman villain character that Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler used to troll the entire world. But he wasn't being Andy Kaufman, who would have interacted with Jerry Lawler in a friendly way. If he was actually meta being Andy Kaufman, when cameras were rolling, he would play the role fine, then when cameras were off, he and Jerry Lawler would laugh and joke. But instead, in this documentary, when you see Jim Carrey and Jerry Lawler interacting, Lawler just looks irritated. But I'm sure Jim Carrey knows that. I'm sure he watches this footage like, yeah, I should have done the other angle with that. I'm pretty sure Jerry Lawler never wants to talk to me again. But as you see in the documentary, him going that direction really does, it creates friction, which pulls people further down into the madness of this weird construct. This fantasy world that Jim Carrey built on set. I don't know if I'm telling you to watch and enjoy insanity play out, or watch and enjoy an interesting behind the scenes look of a movie. All I know is I really enjoyed this. I found it really fascinating. As a fan of Man on the Moon, I should review Man on the Moon. If you're not a big fan of Man on the Moon, if you haven't seen Man on the Moon, if you don't know much about Andy Kaufman, I imagine you won't get as much out of this as someone who is a fan of those things and does know those things. But I still think it is an interesting look, if for nothing else, into the eccentric mind of an actor. I watched that actor 20 years later talk about his eccentric mind 20 years ago. So check it out. It's on Netflix right now. Have fun. All right, guys. So Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever you thought, comment below. Let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.